Inside every individual lives two versions of themselves: the strong one who rises above, who acts with discipline, who embraces discomfort for growth, and the weak one who surrenders to excuses, who seeks comfort above challenge, who fears change more than stagnation. The weak version exists in all of us, and it does not disappear simply because we deny it. In fact, the more we pretend it is not there, the more it shapes our lives in silence. The weak version is not an enemy in the sense of something external. It is an internal companion that follows us at every step. It whispers when we want to rise early and train. Stay in bed a little longer. It speaks when we are confronted with an opportunity. You are not ready. What if you fail? It reminds us of all the reasons not to act, not to try, not to push. This version thrives on hesitation and grows strong in moments of self-doubt. Most people live their lives believing that the weak version defines who they are. They say, "This is just how I am. I lack discipline. I lack confidence. I lack will." But the truth is, the weak version is only one side of the story. The strong version is also there, waiting, watching, often quiet but never gone. The question is never about whether weakness exists inside you. It always will. The real question is, which version do you feed? Which version do you listen to? And which version do you allow to shape your path? When you begin to recognize the weak version, you see it for what it is, a voice of comfort and avoidance. And there is no shame in acknowledging it. To deny it is to lie to yourself, but to see it clearly is the first step to reclaiming strength. The weak version exists so you can learn contrast. Without weakness, you would not understand the depth of strength. Without doubt, you would not feel the power of certainty. Without fear, courage would remain only a word. Every day presents countless small battles with this weaker self. Do you choose the easy path or the right one? Do you act from discipline or impulse? Do you face the hard truth or hide behind excuses? These small choices accumulate into character, into destiny. The weak version asks for nothing but submission. It offers you rest without purpose, comfort without progress, safety without growth, and many times we take that offer because it feels good in the moment. Yet over time, this constant surrender builds a life of regret. The stronger version, on the other hand, is not loud. It does not scream or demand attention. It waits for you to decide, and then it supports you with power once you commit. This stronger self grows when you choose to rise instead of sink, when you keep going despite fatigue, when you act even though fear is present. Strength does not mean the absence of weakness. It means you feel the weakness fully and still choose to act beyond it. The weak version is part of human nature. It cannot be destroyed, only managed. You may wonder why it is there at all. Why should humans be born with a voice that drags them back? The answer lies in balance. Without the weak version, strength would be taken for granted. Without the resistance of inner doubt, growth would lose its meaning. Every time you overcome this inner resistance, you are not just becoming stronger. You are remembering that you always had strength inside you. But weakness is clever. It does not always come in the form of laziness or fear. Sometimes it disguises itself as rationality. It says, wait until the perfect moment. It says, maybe tomorrow will be better. It says, you need more preparation. And in these subtle disguises, it steals years of your life. That is why awareness is essential. To recognize the weak version is to disarm it. Once you can say, I see what is happening inside me right now, you create distance. And in that distance lies the space to choose differently. Some believe strength is about conquering others, but the greatest conquest is of yourself. To master the weak version does not mean you eliminate it, but that you do not allow it to drive your actions. It remains a passenger in the journey of your life, but it does not hold the steering wheel. Look closely and you will see that the weak version loves patterns. It loves repetition because once it knows your habits, it can control you with ease. If you always surrender to procrastination, if you always escape into distraction, it knows exactly where to lead you. But the moment you break even one of these patterns, the weak version begins to lose its grip. Discipline is nothing more than building patterns that favor strength over weakness. It is important to understand that everyone carries this inner struggle. No one is exempt. The greatest athletes, the most disciplined monks, the most accomplished leaders, each of them meets the weak version every day. The difference is not that they are free from it, but that they have trained their minds to choose differently. They have practiced so often that strength has become more natural than weakness. But even then, the battle continues. For as long as one lives, the weak version remains present. To live with this awareness is to live awake. To know that the weak version exists is to never take your choices lightly. Each moment you feed weakness, it grows. Each moment you act from strength, you transform. The choice does not happen once in a lifetime. It happens in every decision, every action, every thought. Awareness is not a concept. It is not something you learn from a book or hear in a lecture and simply repeat. Awareness is the doorway, the very first opening through which all transformation begins. Without awareness, there is no recognition, and without recognition, there is no possibility of change. Many people move through life in patterns, routines, and unconscious cycles. They act, react, speak, and decide without seeing clearly why they do so. They live more like echoes of the past than creators of the present. But once awareness arises, once the light of seeing is turned inward, something begins to shift. Awareness interrupts the unconscious flow and places a mirror before us, allowing us to finally see what is truly happening. The first step is always to notice. Notice the thoughts that move through the mind like endless clouds drifting across the sky. Notice the emotions that come and go like waves upon the shore. Notice the habits of speech, the tendencies of action, the impulses that arise before choice is even considered. Awareness is not judgment. Awareness does not condemn. Awareness simply sees. It shines the light of attention into the hidden corners where unconsciousness has been operating, and suddenly the unseen becomes visible. When awareness becomes stronger, what once felt automatic begins to reveal itself as a choice. Anger no longer bursts forth as if it owned you. You notice it rising, you see the tension forming, you witness the fire heating up inside. Fear no longer silently controls you from behind the scenes. You catch the subtle tightening in the chest, the shallow breath, the restless thoughts spinning. Awareness makes what is unconscious conscious. And once it is conscious, it can be worked with, shaped, transformed. Without this first step, all attempts at change are like walking in darkness, fumbling and repeating the same mistakes without ever understanding why. Awareness is power because it interrupts. The moment you are aware, the chain of reaction is broken. You are no longer a prisoner to habit. This is why awareness is considered the seed of freedom. Without awareness, the old programs run the show. With awareness, you see the program as it runs and you begin to choose differently. The same thought can arise, but now it is just a thought. The same fear can appear, but now it is just a sensation. The same craving can return, but now it is seen for what it is, an impermanent urge that comes and goes. Awareness reveals the impermanence of all experiences, and in seeing this, you are no longer held captive by them. The practice of cultivating awareness is not limited to meditation cushions or quiet retreats. It is the practice of living with open eyes. Every moment becomes the opportunity to strengthen this seeing. When eating, notice the taste, the texture, the rhythm of chewing. When walking, notice the feeling of the ground, the posture of the body, the pace of your steps. When speaking, notice the tone of voice, the choice of words, the intention behind them. This is not about controlling life or making it rigid. It is about noticing life as it unfolds. Awareness makes even the ordinary alive. It makes what was once mechanical into something vibrant and clear. But awareness requires honesty. To be aware is not only to notice what feels pleasant or comfortable. It is also to notice what feels unpleasant, the parts of ourselves we would rather avoid, the shadows of anger, jealousy, greed, or insecurity. Awareness does not push them away, nor does it indulge them. It simply sees them for what they are. This seeing is the beginning of liberation, because whatever is seen clearly loses its power to control in the dark. The chains that hold us strongest are the ones we do not see. Awareness makes those chains visible, and visibility is the first step toward loosening them. Awareness also connects. It connects the mind to the body, the present moment to the breath, the heart to the world around us. It breaks the illusion of separation between on-side and outside. When you are aware of your own heartbeat, you also begin to sense the rhythm of life all around you. When you are aware of your own suffering, you begin to see the suffering of others. Awareness deepens empathy because it reveals the shared human experience of joy and struggle. It dissolves isolation by showing that you are part of a larger whole. There is a discipline required in awareness, but it is not the discipline of force. It is the discipline of remembering. Again and again, life will pull you into forgetfulness. Thoughts will absorb your attention, emotions will overwhelm, habits will take over. And again, the practice is to return to notice, to be aware once more. It is like training a muscle. At first weak, but with repeated use, it grows strong. Eventually, awareness becomes more continuous, more natural, more stable. Then life is no longer lived in a haze of distraction, but with a clarity that cuts through confusion. Awareness is also humbling. When you begin to notice deeply, you see how much of your life has been lived unconsciously. You see how often actions have been reactive, how often decisions were guided by fear or desire without reflection. This realization can feel uncomfortable, but it is also empowering. For if you can see how unconscious you have been, then you also see the possibility of becoming more conscious now. The past is not a prison when awareness opens the door to the present. Awareness is not the final step. It is only the first. But without it, no other step is possible. All growth, all transformation, all wisdom begins here, with the simple act of seeing clearly. The journey of 1,000 changes begins with this first awakening to what is real, here and now, within and around. Awareness is the spark that lights the path, the foundation upon which everything else is built. The quiet beginning of freedom that grows into transformation. Desire is one of the strongest forces within the human being. It appears in the body as cravings, in the mind as thoughts that repeat without end, and in the heart as longings that never seem to be fully satisfied. Desire promises joy, fulfillment, and happiness, yet very often it leaves us restless, distracted, and never at peace. The nature of desire is that once one is fulfilled, another quickly arises. It is like a flame that, when fed, burns even stronger and demands more fuel. To live life controlled by desire is to become a servant to a master that never grows tired. This is why the ancient masters always taught, do not destroy desire, but do not let desire rule you. Instead, cultivate discipline, because discipline is the only power that can stand firm when desire tries to pull you in countless directions. Discipline is not about punishment, nor is it about restricting life until nothing remains. Discipline is the ability to see clearly, to remain steady, and to choose consciously rather than blindly following every impulse. Without discipline, a person may chase pleasure endlessly, but never discover contentment. With discipline, even the smallest act of self-control becomes a victory that builds strength. A disciplined person does not become weak when desires arise. Instead, they remain rooted like a mountain while the winds of craving pass by. The world does not stop presenting temptations, but the disciplined individual no longer trembles when they appear. Think of the body. If one gives in to every desire of the body, health declines quickly. The desire to eat excessively, to indulge in laziness, to avoid discomfort, all of these eventually weaken the body and make it incapable of carrying out the demands of life. But when the body is guided by discipline, when one eats in balance, trains consistently, and rests with purpose, the body becomes a temple that supports the journey. Discipline over the body is not suffering. It is the act of shaping the vessel so it can endure. In the same way, when the mind is not disciplined, thoughts scatter in 1,000 directions. But when discipline is applied to the mind, focus deepens, clarity emerges, and one's energy no longer leaks away into endless distractions. Desire often disguises itself as freedom, whispering that we are free when we do what we want, when we follow every impulse. Yet this is not freedom, it is dependence. A person controlled by desire is like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. True freedom comes from discipline, for when one has discipline, one can choose whether to act on desire or not. To be able to say no to oneself is a greater freedom than to say yes to everything. The ability to hold back when every part of you wants to give in is the moment when discipline shows its true strength. The ancient teachings always warned that unchecked desire grows into suffering. The more one seeks to satisfy it, the more it multiplies. This is why discipline is a form of wisdom. It recognizes that not all desires need to be fulfilled, that some desires only distract from what is meaningful, that some desires rob us of energy that could be directed toward higher purposes. A disciplined individual does not kill desire, but observes it, measures it, and acts only when it aligns with their values and goals. In this way, discipline becomes the guardian of life's energy. To walk with discipline is to walk with patience. It is to understand that the gratification of the moment is small compared to the reward of long-term growth. Desire shouts loudly, demanding attention here and now. Discipline speaks quietly, guiding you toward a path that may not bring instant satisfaction, but it leads to strength, stability, and mastery over oneself. This is why discipline is often uncomfortable in the beginning. It requires sacrifice, but the sacrifice is never truly loss. What is given up is fleeting, what is gained is lasting. Consider the warrior who trains each day. The body may desire rest, the mind may desire ease, yet the warrior chooses discipline. In time, that discipline becomes strength, resilience, and readiness. Consider the artist who practices tirelessly. The desire to quit, to avoid effort, to seek distraction appears again and again. But through discipline, mastery is achieved, and expression flows more deeply than desire alone could ever produce. Discipline does not extinguish passion. On the contrary, discipline refines passion so it does not burn uncontrollably and consume everything in its path. Without discipline, desire is like water spilling everywhere, soaking the ground without purpose. With discipline, that same water is channeled into a river, flowing with direction, carrying power, and shaping the land it touches. The disciplined life is not a life without desire. It is a life where desire is transformed into fuel for growth rather than chains that bind. In the end, the measure of a person is not how many desires they have satisfied, but how much strength they have cultivated to stand above them. The pursuit of discipline over desire is the pursuit of mastery over oneself. To rule over nations is impressive, but to rule over one's own cravings is far greater. Because the moment one learns to place discipline over desire, life no longer pulls in fragments but gathers into unity. Energy is no longer wasted, but conserved. Strength is no longer borrowed from fleeting pleasures, but built through deliberate action. And it is through this path that a person becomes unshakable, steady, and free from the endless hunger that keeps most bound, and repetition is often praised as the key to mastery, the path through which skill is sharpened and discipline is built. In many traditions, whether it is martial arts, music, or meditation, repetition forms the very foundation of progress. Yet, when repetition loses its soul, when it becomes mechanical, unconscious, and unexamined, it no longer carries the energy of growth, but begins to resemble death. Not a physical death, but the death of awareness, the death of curiosity, the death of one's living spirit. What once was a tool for awakening can easily transform into a cycle of decay. The danger of repetition is subtle. On the surface, repeating an action or thought seems harmless. But when patterns repeat without awareness, they harden into habits, and habits, if left unchecked, begin to shape identity. The human being becomes trapped inside invisible walls, repeating words, repeating choices, repeating emotions, repeating failures, and believing this cycle to be life. In reality, this is stagnation. The body may be moving, the voice may be speaking, but the inner essence is asleep, caught in the loop of yesterday. Repetition without transformation is nothing but a circle that leads back to the same point over and over again. It is not the act of repeating that creates death, but the lack of presence within it. For example, in Shaolin training, a single movement may be practiced thousands of times. But if each repetition is done with full awareness, with eyes open and spirit engaged, then each repetition becomes alive. Each time the stance is taken, each time the strike is delivered, it is not the same strike as yesterday, because the practitioner is not the same person as yesterday. Life has moved, time has passed, breath has shifted. Awareness transforms repetition into evolution. But when one moves without awareness, when one simply copies the past, the present moment dies and the action becomes empty. Life itself warns us of the danger of unconscious repetition. Observe the mind. How often does it return to the same worry, the same fear, the same anger, as if addicted to its own poison? Observe conversations. How often do people say the same complaints, the same judgments, the same excuses, as though they are reading from a script written long ago? This is death through repetition. The energy of life is not flowing forward but looping endlessly, draining vitality, narrowing perception, and suffocating possibility. True freedom begins when one recognizes the repetitive patterns that no longer serve, to see clearly the cycle of one's own thoughts, the recurring emotions that steal energy, the behaviors that sabotage growth. This awareness is the first step in breaking the chain. Without this recognition, a person can live decades in the same cycle, mistaking comfort for life. But what is comfort when it is built on the familiar cage of repetition? Comfort becomes prison. Security becomes stagnation. The individual becomes a shadow of themselves, existing, but not truly living. The most profound death through repetition is not seen in physical movements, but in the spirit. When the inner fire stops burning, when curiosity no longer arises, when the sense of wonder fades into the monotony of routine, then the heart is no longer alive. To repeat each day the same thoughts, the same actions, the same limited beliefs is to bury one's own potential while still breathing. The body continues to move, but the essence has been buried beneath layers of unexamined cycles. To escape this death does not mean to abandon repetition altogether. Discipline is built upon returning again and again, but the difference lies in intention and presence. To repeat consciously is to breathe life into each cycle. To repeat unconsciously is to remove the breath from it. The same word, when spoken with awareness, carries power. When spoken without awareness, it becomes noise. The same movement, when filled with spirit, becomes an expression of mastery. When emptied of spirit, it is nothing but lifeless mechanics. Repetition can serve as a mirror. It shows the practitioner who they are in the moment. Each cycle reflects whether attention is present or absent, whether energy is awake or dull. Through this mirror, one can learn to use repetition as a tool for awakening instead of allowing it to become the silent killer of awareness. But society itself thrives on repetition. The systems, the routines, the expectations, all are designed to create predictable cycles. People are educated to think in repetitive ways, to follow the same patterns of success, to seek the same markers of achievement, to chase the same symbols of status. This mass repetition is mistaken for life, but in reality, it is collective death. A life lived on borrowed patterns is not truly one's own life. It is merely existence within the repetition of others. Death through repetition is not dramatic. It does not arrive suddenly. It creeps quietly, hidden in the everyday, in the way one wakes up each morning with the same complaint, in the way one interacts with others through the same shallow patterns, in the way one resists change by clinging to what is familiar, even if it suffocates. Slowly, life energy leaks away unnoticed until the person cannot remember what it felt like to truly be alive. The practice then is not to avoid repetition, but to awaken within it, to bring such presence into each cycle that even the simplest action becomes new, to breathe into the repeated moment as if it were the very first time. In this way, repetition becomes rebirth, not death. But without presence, repetition remains the silent destroyer, draining the essence of life while the body continues its hollow routines. Pain is often seen as an intruder, something to be avoided, denied, or suppressed. Yet, when we observe life carefully, it becomes clear that pain is not merely an obstacle. Pain is a messenger, a guide, and a teacher that shapes the depth of human experience. It arrives uninvited, yet it carries lessons that no comfort could ever reveal. In the stillness of struggle, when the heart feels heavy and the mind restless, pain creates an opening for growth that ease and pleasure rarely provide. To reject it is to reject a part of existence that is essential for becoming whole. When the body hurts, it demands attention. It reminds us of fragility, of limits, of the importance of care. In the same way, when the soul hurts, it points to truths that we have overlooked. Pain does not come without reason. It has roots in attachments, in expectations, in resistance to what is. The sting of disappointment, the ache of loss, the tension of fear, all these carry within them a mirror that reflects back the inner state. If one dares to look into that mirror without judgment, the lessons become visible. Pain teaches us what matters most by showing us what we cannot ignore. Pain slows us down. In a world that moves restlessly, always pushing for speed, productivity, and distraction, pain forces a pause. It strips away the illusion of control and asks us to be present. A broken bone forces rest. A broken heart forces reflection. The teacher does not speak in words, but in silence, in stillness, in the uncomfortable spaces where we are left with nothing but ourselves. And in that raw encounter, we begin to see how much of life we cover with noise, how much we run from the truths that pain quietly exposes. There is a discipline hidden within pain. It tests the strength of endurance, the patience of spirit, and the resilience of the mind. Those who embrace it without collapse begin to uncover layers of inner power they never knew existed. Each moment of pain that is endured with awareness chisels away at fear. It is not about glorifying suffering, but about recognizing that suffering transforms when it is faced directly. The fire of pain burns, but it also forges. It sharpens clarity, deepens compassion, and strengthens will. What once felt unbearable eventually reveals itself as the source of growth that comfort could never provide. Consider how pain expands empathy. To know struggle is to understand the struggles of others. To have carried a burden is to recognize the weight another is carrying. Without pain, compassion remains shallow, theoretical, distant. But when one has walked through valleys of difficulty, the heart naturally opens to others in a way that is real and sincere. Pain, then, does not isolate. It connects. It creates invisible bridges between lives, between stories, between souls who have tasted the bitterness of loss and the heaviness of trials. Pain is also the reminder of impermanence. It shows how fleeting states of the body and mind truly are. No wound lasts forever, though it may feel eternal in the moment. No heartbreak remains untouched by time, though it may seem endless. Pain teaches the law of change, the flow of existence that does not remain fixed. And when one understands impermanence, pain loosens its grip. It becomes not a permanent curse, but a temporary messenger. Each throb, each ache, each tear shed becomes a signpost pointing to the truth that everything passes, that no storm stays forever, that transformation is inevitable. There is wisdom in not running from pain, but entering into dialogue with it. To ask, what is this pain showing me? What attachment is it pointing toward? What illusion is it unraveling? In this way, pain becomes not just something to survive, but something to study. The lessons are hidden beneath its intensity. The invitation is to turn inward, to listen deeply, and to find the teaching concealed within the discomfort. Many discover that the very pain they resisted was the turning point toward awakening, toward a clearer understanding of life's essence. In the end, pain strips away illusions of permanence, of control, of separateness. It forces us into humility, into presence, into acceptance. Without it, we might drift endlessly in comfort, blind to deeper truths. With it, we are shaken awake, reminded of what is real, what is fragile, and what is worth cherishing. Pain becomes the teacher not because it is kind, but because it is honest. It does not flatter or deceive. It shows directly what must be faced. And through facing it, transformation begins, clarity sharpens, and the human spirit grows in ways that only pain could make possible. Strength is not something that is merely inherited, nor is it something that arrives in a single moment of life. Strength is a continuous process, a forging of the spirit, an ongoing cycle where the self dies in one form and is reborn in another. To speak of the rebirth of the strong self is to understand that weakness, failure, pain, and doubt are not signs of an end, but signals of a transformation that is waiting to happen. The human being is not static, we are fluid, like the river that cuts through stone not by force, but by persistence, reshaping everything it touches over time. In the same way, the strong self does not suddenly appear, but emerges through the process of shedding, enduring, and awakening. The rebirth of the strong self begins in the quiet recognition that the old ways no longer serve. Many hold on to identities shaped by the past, by mistakes, by the weight of expectations that do not belong to them. The old self clings to fears, to judgments, to the belief that strength must look like dominance or control. But true strength is not born from control, it is born from release. The weak self resists life, tries to hold every moment, every outcome, every person in a tight grip, believing that this is safety. But safety without growth is imprisonment. When that grip finally breaks, when the old self crumbles under the pressure of its own illusions, the space for rebirth opens. This rebirth is not dramatic in the way that people expect. It is not always a loud declaration or a sudden transformation seen by the world. It often begins quietly, like a seed under the soil that prepares in silence before it pushes through. The strong self rises not from denial of pain, but from walking through it and allowing it to shape wisdom. Every scar becomes a line in the story of resilience. Every fall becomes the ground from which the spirit rises again. Strength is not an absence of vulnerability, but the courage to be vulnerable and still move forward. The rebirth of the strong self also requires surrender. It is the act of bowing to life, of acknowledging that control is limited, and yet power lies in how one chooses to respond. Many left believing that strength is resistance, but resistance exhausts the soul. Surrender does not mean defeat. It means recognizing that life has currents that flow stronger than individual will. To flow with them is not weakness, it is alignment. The strong self is reborn when one stops fighting what cannot be controlled and instead uses that energy to shape what can. The storms of life are unavoidable, But the way one stands within the storm determines whether they are broken or remade. Every rebirth requires the death of something. The strong self cannot be reborn if the weak self still clings to illusions of certainty, to false pride, to old wounds kept alive through memory. There is pain in this shedding, for letting go of the old self feels like losing a part of identity. But just as the snake must shed its skin to continue growing, the human spirit must shed the layers that no longer serve its growth. The old skin may have once been protection, but once it becomes too tight, it suffocates. In the act of shedding, a new self emerges, stronger, freer, truer. The rebirth of the strong self is also a return to authenticity. Many live lives constructed for others, shaped by external approval, defined by masks worn to survive in society. But strength that is built on a mask eventually collapses under its weight. The strong self is authentic, grounded in its own truth, not in borrowed beliefs. It speaks with clarity, acts with intention, and walks with alignment. This authenticity is not about pleasing others, nor is it about rebellion for its own sake. It is about living from the center, where the spirit feels unshaken regardless of outside noise. In this process, silence becomes a teacher. The rebirth of the strong self does not come through constant noise or distraction. It comes when the mind grows still enough to hear its own inner voice again. In silence, the clutter of the world dissolves, and the self begins to remember what it truly is, beyond titles, beyond roles, beyond fears. In silence, the weak self fades, and the strong self rises with clarity. This is why so many traditions honor stillness, meditation, and solitude. It is within the empty spaces that the rebirth is prepared. Strength, when reborn, is not rigid. It is flexible, able to bend without breaking, able to adapt without losing its essence. The strong self is not threatened by change because it understands that change is the essence of life. It does not hold tightly to what is leaving, nor does it rush blindly into what is coming. It stands rooted, aware, prepared to adjust, yet firm in its foundation. This balance is the hallmark of true strength, the ability to be unshaken within while moving with the tides of the external world. The rebirth of the strong self is therefore both an ending and a beginning. It is the closing of chapters that no longer fit and the opening of new possibilities that were once hidden. It is the recognition that strength is not perfection but persistence. It is not about never falling but about always rising differently each time. Each cycle of rebirth deepens wisdom, sharpens clarity, and strengthens the core of being. To be reborn is to realize that strength has always been present, waiting beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the old layers are stripped away so the true self can step forward without fear, without pretense, without hesitation.